Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we don't just skim the surface of knowledge. We go straight to the foundational ideas that shape our world.
And today, we're looking at a real giant.
A giant is the right word. We are taking a monumental intellectual leap guided by a scholar whose ideas fundamentally changed how we understand human behavior in the workplace. Herbert A. Simon.
Simon is, he's just unique. His influence spanned artificial intelligence, psychology, economics. He won the Nobel Prize for that. And crucially for us, political science and public administration.
Right.
If you read a management book today, even if his name isn't in it, I guarantee you it stands on the shoulders of his revolutionary insights.
Absolutely. When we think of organizations, we usually default to these images of neat hierarchy, clear chains of command.
The org chart.
Exactly, the org chart. All these structural rules laid down by the classical masters of administration, people like Henri Fayol or Luther Gulick. But Simon, he enters this established world, takes one look at those charts, and asks a really a dangerous question. Are these principles even real?
He argued they weren't. His central insight, and this is really the core of our entire deep dive today, is that the function of administration, the messy reality of getting things done, it's not primarily about authority or structure.
No.
It is entirely about decision-making. He dragged organizational study out of the dusty archives of organizational charts and put it right into the scientific realm of human psychology.
And that's our mission for you, the listener.
Right.
We're going to deconstruct Simon's famous attack. Understand why he labeled the sacred tenets of management proverbs.
Which is such a great word for it.
It's perfect. And then we'll build back up, brick by psychological brick, his realistic model of human action. We will explore how he introduced concepts like bounded rationality and the fantastic term satisficing.
Ah, satisficing. Love that word.
It explains why you, me, and every CEO alive chooses the solution that is good enough rather than the perfect one. So let's get started on the foundation.
So when Simon was writing, this is mid-20th century.
Right, the 40s and 50s. The established view, the classical school, was just obsessed with structure. Their whole thing was, if you get the structure right, the decisions will take care of themselves. But Simon completely flipped that.
He flipped it entirely. He stated, and this is the quote that reoriented the entire field, that administration is nothing but decision-making.
It's such a simple but profound statement.
It's a complete reframing. I mean, if the goal is decision-making, then the optimal structure is simply the one that facilitates the best decision flow. It's not the one that looks neatest on paper.
Right.
And it's important to note, Simon wasn't working in a vacuum. The sources show he was profoundly influenced by Chester Barnard's earlier work, Functions of the Executive.
Oh yeah, Barnard. He focused on the organization as a cooperative system, right? The whole idea that it depends on the willingness of subordinates to accept authority.
Precisely. Simon referenced Barnard a massive 37 times in his work. He saw that Barnard had already laid the groundwork for thinking about administration through a psychological, systems-based lens.
So focusing on things like cooperation and communication?
Yes, rather than just rigid lines of power, Simon basically took Barnard's framework and grafted a fully scientific decision theory right onto it.
So if we accept that the ultimate currency of an organization is the quality of its decisions, then we have to evaluate all those classical rules through that lens. And Simon famously found them lacking.
He was brutal. I mean, he didn't just critique them, he ridiculed them. He called the classical principles compiled by people like Gulick and Urwick mere proverbs, myths, slogans, and pompous inanities.
Pompous inanities. That is the intellectual equivalent of a total system failure warning. But why such venom? Was it just that the principles were old-fashioned?
No, the problem wasn't their age at all. It was their logical inconsistency. Simon's argument was that these principles, which were supposed to be universal laws of good management, were just flat-out contradictory when you try to apply them at the same time.
I see.
For every piece of advice the classical thinkers offered, call it Principle A, they offered an equally valid but opposing Principle B.
And so a manager is faced with two mutually exclusive pieces of advice.
And the principle itself offers no guidance on which to choose. So it becomes useless. It's not a principle anymore, it's just a saying, a proverb.
That makes perfect sense. If you have to choose between two equally sound pieces of advice that lead to opposite outcomes, you're just left guessing.
Yeah.
Let's get into the weeds with the specific conflicts he highlighted, because this is where the theory gets really real.
Okay.
Let's start with the big one. The conflict between span of control and the need for efficient communication.
This is probably the most obvious structural paradox. So, classical principle A span of control says a narrow span is better. An executive can only effectively supervise a small, limited number of direct reports, maybe 5 or 6.
And the benefit there is supposed to be close supervision, tight control.
Exactly. But what's the consequence of that narrow span?
Well, it forces the organization to become tall, right?
Yes, tall. If you limit every manager to only 6 reports, you rapidly multiply the levels of hierarchy needed to manage, say, a few thousand people. You end up with a huge number of vertical steps between the top leadership and the workers on the floor.
But then you immediately run headlong into Principle B, communication.
Right. Principle B argues that for an organization to be efficient, you need swift, undistorted information flow.
Which means you need a flat structure.
A flat structure with as few levels as possible. Every extra layer in that tall structure means communication slows down, information gets distorted or filtered on its way up and down, and decision-making authority moves further and further away from the point of action.
So if I pursue close control, the narrow span, I create a tall structure that immediately sabotages my communication, my efficiency. But if I pursue fast, clear communication, a flat structure, I'm forced to widen the span of control, which destroys the manager's ability to supervise effectively. You literally can't win.
It's a structural zero-sum game. Simon's point was that the principles tell you what to optimize, supervision or communication, but they never tell you how to balance them. They never tell you which one is superior in a given context.
So they're not scientific laws.
They are just contradictory suggestions. Proverbs.
Okay, that one's clear. Let's move to the organizational level, looking at specialization versus unity of command. This feels like it gets into the actual work being done.
It does. And this really highlights the disconnect between old school sort of military models of organization and modern complex knowledge-based organizations.
Right.
So Principle A, specialization, is all about efficiency through skill. You divide tasks into the smallest, most manageable components so that workers become highly expert and efficient in their very narrow domain.
And this is essential for innovation and technical quality, in fields like surgery or engineering or IT.
Absolutely. Then you have Principle B, which is the rock of traditional authority, unity of command. One subordinate must have only one boss. No mixed signals, no conflicting directions.
But you can see the conflict coming a mile away.
Oh, yeah. Imagine that highly specialized technician or a senior nurse in a modern hospital. Who is their boss?
Well, they have their administrative manager.
The person who handles their pay, their leave, disciplinary issues, that's the unity of command boss.
Right.
But when they're performing a complex, specialized task, say, operating new diagnostic equipment, who are they functionally reporting to?
They're reporting to the technical lead or the specialist physician who's in charge of the procedure.
The technical expert has superior knowledge and must give the orders related to that technical task, even if they aren't the official administrative superior.
So the conflict is baked in. If the technician follows the technical expert's specific instructions to make sure the task is done efficiently,
Maximizing specialization.
they're inevitably taking directions from someone other than their singular administrative boss. They've just violated unity of command.
And Simon's conclusion was that specialization, which is necessary for efficiency in any modern organization, inherently makes strict adherence to the unity of command principle either impossible or, if you try to force it, highly inefficient.
It seems like classical theory just assumed all orders were interchangeable, like administrative and technical direction were the same thing.
They absolutely did. They completely failed to account for the increasing technical complexity that demands specialized input from multiple sources, even if that input has to cross official organizational boundaries.
Okay, that makes sense. The third paradox Simon exposed was structural, dealing with how we categorize departments. The 4Ps dilemma: grouping by purpose, process, person, or place.
Right, so classical theory suggested these 4 methods for creating departments. You can organize by the end product, which is purpose.
Like in the Department of Transportation.
Exactly. Or you can organize by the technical method being used, which is process.
The Department of Engineering.
Right. Or by the clientele being served, which is person. Or by geographic location, which is place. And the classical thinkers presented these as, clear, distinct choices.
But they're not so clear, are they? Let's use that Ministry of Finance example from the sources again, but let's really flesh it out. How do these 4 categories blur together?
Okay, so take a government's Ministry of Finance. We can define its structure using all 4 Ps at the same time, and that is the problem.
Okay, so let's start with purpose.
Its purpose is funding the government and regulating the nation's financial health. That's its mission.
Simple enough. Now, process.
Well, what's its process? It's budgeting, economic analysis, tax collection, expenditure tracking. You could very easily have a Department of Budgetary process.
But wait, the ministry's purpose ensuring financial stability is achieved entirely through its specific processes.
Exactly.
You can't have the purpose without the process. They're not separate things.
They're not distinct theoretical categories. They are fused in reality, and it gets worse. Let's try person.
The client.
The client. Maybe they have a specialized section dealing exclusively with the financial needs and audits of, say, state-owned enterprises or nonprofits. That's grouping by person or clientele.
And finally, place.
Well, they must have regional offices or international offices to handle treaties or audits in specific geographic locations. That's grouping by place.
So if you decide to structure your department primarily by purpose, you're immediately obscuring the fact that you're simultaneously running multiple specialized processes for different persons in different places.
Precisely. Simon demonstrated that these categories are so deeply intertwined that using them as clear, separate guides for organizational design just leads to ambiguity and turf wars. It offers managers no objective scientific method for choosing the optimal structure.
So the overall conclusion is just undeniable. These rules are not scientific laws. They are contradictory pieces of folklore.
The entire classical approach lacked scientific rigor. It was just a collection of observations that happened to work for one guy in one factory one time.
And that brings us to the construction phase of Simon's work. He didn't just want to tear down the old rules. He wanted to replace them with a system based on, verification and evidence. He demanded a true science of administration.
And this demand really came from realizing how shaky the classical foundations were. As you said, they were based on rule of thumb and casual observation.
It's incredible to think about. We're talking about massive, globally applied theories that were derived from one guy's observations at a single mining company or another guy's experience at Midvale Steel.
It's anecdotal evidence. It's not empirical science.
So if you wanted genuine science, it needs to be based on data, verification, and inductive analysis testable hypotheses. How on earth does Simon transform the messy reality of human choices into something scientific?
He had to introduce a razor-sharp distinction that separates the verifiable from the subjective. This is the philosophical core of his argument, the separation of fact versus value.
Okay, let's break down those two components of any decision.
First, you have the value component. This is the end of the decision. It covers all the ethical preferences, the moral beliefs, the ultimate organizational goals.
So, an example would be a policy goal like the government should ensure universal health care access.
Exactly. Or a moral imperative like we should prioritize justice over speed. These are the oughts, the things we believe should happen.
And these are, in his view, subjective.
They are subjective. And critically, Simon argued these are non-scientific. You cannot run an experiment that objectively proves that justice is a better value than speed. These are preferences, often driven by politics, philosophy, or personal belief.
Okay, so that's the value component. Now the second part, the factual component.
This is the means. This is the objective reality, the data, the concrete methods you use to achieve that value-based end.
So if your value is universal health care,
Your fact component deals with the measurable realities. Method A, building community clinics, is statistically more cost-effective and faster than Method B, subsidizing private insurance. This component is observable, testable, and verifiable. It's the is.
wait, I need to pause here because this feels massive. Simon is essentially saying that to make administration scientific, you have to ignore the goals of the organization, the oughts, and focus only on the mechanisms, the is. How did he justify ignoring the entire ethical and political dimension of a decision?
He justified it by aligning himself squarely with a major philosophical movement of the time, logical positivism.
Ah,
Logical positivism dictates that any true, meaningful knowledge must be empirically verifiable or logically derivable. Anything else is, frankly, meaningless noise from a scientific perspective.
so since values like justice, fairness, or even a company's strategic vision can't be empirically proven or disproven,
Because they're subjective statements of preference.
they have to be excluded from the domain of science.
Correct. His rule is uncompromising. A science of administration must deal only with the factual component, the verifiable means and methods.
So the administrator, in Simon's view, is just an objective engineer of efficiency.
That's a great way to put it. Their job is not to question the value, like, should we drill for oil? Their job is to determine the most efficient means to achieve that chosen end. So if we drill for oil, method X is the fastest and cheapest way to do it.
By surgically removing the value judgments, Simon believed he could elevate administration to the status of a true, objective science.
Yes, allowing for verifiable theories based on efficiency data. It's a powerful, but you're right, it's a very cold approach. It insists that the only thing an administrator can rationally argue about is efficiency, not morality.
It is cold, but it did achieve his objective of establishing a scientific standard where before him there was just proverbs.
Exactly. It forced administrators to move beyond subjective feelings and demand objective data to justify their methods.
This focus on verifiable facts and means immediately forces us to look closer at the actual process of choice itself. If administration is decision-making, we need a roadmap of how that actually happens.
Right. And Simon identified a clear sequence of steps that every decision maker, no matter how limited, follows.
The first step is what he called intelligence activity.
Yeah, and you should think of it like military intelligence.
Searching for the enemy.
In a way, yes. It's the scanning phase. The administrator is constantly surveying the internal and external environment markets, political shifts, internal data, budgets, to find the occasion or the problem that needs action. This is the moment where the decision maker recognizes, okay, a choice needs to be made here.
Once that problem is flagged by the intelligence radar, you move to figuring out how to solve it. That's stage 2, design activity.
This is the inventive analytical phase. This is where the administrator develops, designs, and analyzes all possible courses of action. It's where models are built and scenarios are run.
So, if we choose option A, what consequences follow? If we choose option B, what resources are required?
Exactly. It's a purely theoretical exploration before any commitment is made.
And then, the actual moment of commitment. Stage 3, choice activity.
Selection. The administrator selects the single preferred course of action from the portfolio they developed in stage 2. And we should add that, recognizing how static these 3 stages felt, Simon later added a crucial 4th element.
Which was?
Feedback. This means the outcomes of the choice activity are measured and then cycled back into the intelligence activity. It creates a constant learning loop for the organization.
Okay, so those steps describe the process of a perfectly rational machine. But the real genius of Simon, the part that earned him the Nobel Prize in economics, was inserting the messy, imperfect human being into this mechanical process. This is the concept of bounded rationality.
This is the fundamental break with tradition. Traditional economic theory, before Simon, operated on this assumption of total rationality.
The economic man.
The economic man, this mythical maximizer. He was assumed to possess infinite knowledge, infinite time, and infinite computational capacity.
So he would know all possible alternatives globally. He would know all the consequences attached to every single alternative.
And he could compute the maximum utility from all of that instantaneously.
Which is just an utterly impossible standard for a real person making a real decision about, say, hiring a new employee or choosing a new ERP system.
Absolutely impossible. Simon recognized that real human beings are severely limited. We have finite mental capacity, our time is scarce, information is incomplete, and our memory is faulty.
So since we're constrained by these limits, we can't maximize.
We can't. We operate under bounded rationality. We are rational, but only within the narrow, highly restrictive boundaries of our current knowledge and our current capacity.
That distinction-bounded rationality is probably the most important thing we need to internalize about Simon's work. And it forced him to categorize decision-makers into 3 different types.
Right.
The first, the one that doesn't exist, is the economic man.
The perfect maximizer. The ghost of classical theory.
Then you have the social man.
This character, which came from some of the early human relations theories, is driven primarily by emotional and social needs relationships, loyalty, group dynamics.
So he's not totally irrational.
No, but while Simon acknowledged the importance of social factors, he viewed the social man as undesirable for optimal decision-making, because this individual often ignores the factual, objective analysis in favor of making people feel good or preserving group harmony.
And finally, the realistic organizational player, the administrative man.
The administrative man is the hero of Simon's story. He's rational, but he is fundamentally practical. He knows he cannot find the absolute perfect maximal solution. It's just not possible.
So he redefines success.
He completely redefines success. Instead of searching exhaustively for the best possible outcome, he looks for a solution that simply meets the minimum acceptable criteria, a solution that is good enough to solve the immediate problem.
And this search for good enough gives us the most memorable term in his entire lexicon. Satisficing.
Satisficing? It's a portmanteau, a combination of satisfaction and sufficing. The administrative man satisfices, he doesn't maximize.
Can you give us a concrete example? The used car one is great.
The used car example is perfect. The maximizer would have to spend weeks, maybe months, researching every single car for sale in the entire region. They'd have to weigh every variable, price, mileage, features, color, accident history, constantly recalculating until they found the absolute best price-mileage feature combination possible.
An impossible task.
Impossible. The Satisficer, on the other hand, sets a simple threshold. I need a sedan under $10,000 with less than 80,000 miles. The moment they find the very first option that meets those criteria, they stop the exhaustive search and they buy it.
Because the marginal utility, the tiny extra benefit they might gain from finding a potentially 2% better car, does not justify the enormous time and cognitive cost of searching for 3 more weeks.
Precisely. Satisficing is the scientifically rational choice for the bounded human being. It's an efficient use of your limited resources, your time and your mental energy, that achieves an acceptable outcome. And it allows the administrator to move on to the next problem that requires their attention. It's the mechanism by which organizations survive complexity.
So this shifts the entire focus of management, doesn't it? If we know our administrators are satisficers operating under these bounds, the goal is no longer achieving some impossible perfection.
No.
The goal is improving the quality of the decisions within those bounds. So how does a manager actually achieve that increase in rationality?
By strategically managing the 2 fundamental types of decisions that occur in an organization. Simon categorized them by their structure: programmed and non-programmed.
Okay, program decisions sound like the easy ones.
They are. They are the routine, repetitive, almost algorithmic tasks. They're handled by established organizational habits, standard operating procedures, SOPs, or clear, predefined rules.
Give me some examples.
Things like automatically replenishing inventory when stock hits a certain low, or calculating monthly employee bonuses based on a set of fixed metrics, or authorizing a standard sick leave application.
The rationality is high here.
It's very high because the bounds, the rules of the decision, are already defined by the organization. There's not much to think about.
And then the dangerous ones, non-programmed decisions.
These are novel, unstructured, unique problems. They lack any clear precedent or established procedures. And they carry high risk because the administrator is operating with extremely low rationality. They're essentially making it up as they go.
A classic example would be deciding how to respond to a competitor's completely unexpected new product launch.
Or how to restructure the C-suite after a major internal scandal. There's no playbook for that.
So if the programmed decisions are easy, and the non-programmed ones are resource drains that force us to rely on these low rationality choices, the manager's strategic objective must be simple.
Eliminate the non-programmed complexity.
Turn the unknown into the known.
That is the core idea. The conversion strategy. A successful, efficient organization works actively to convert every non-programmed decision into a programmed one. You take that unique crisis, the first time you had to deal with a mass product recall, you solve it, you document the solution, and you turn it into a step-by-step procedure.
So that future similar crises then become routine, rationalized decisions.
Exactly.
How exactly does a manager convert that unstructured chaos into predictable routine? Simon pointed to 2 main ways, one traditional and one extremely modern for his time.
The traditional strategy is all about human capital. It's about selecting and training skilled people. You raise the internal capacity of the employee's bounded rationality through experience, education, and practice.
So you hire the most expert accountants you can find so that their internal decision-making bounds are already broader than someone with less training.
Right. But the Neo strategy, this is where he was really forward-thinking. It relied on tools that could circumvent human limitations entirely.
This is where Simon was visionary, decades ahead of the curve. He championed the use of advanced technology and analytical methods to automate and rationalize complex choices.
He explicitly mentioned things like operations research, or ORR, computer simulation, and sophisticated data processing.
I think we need to ground operations research for the listener. What exactly is it in this context?
Operations research is it's essentially applying advanced mathematical and analytical methods like optimization algorithms or statistical modeling to complex administrative problems.
Okay, so give me an example.
A non-programmed decision might be figuring out the optimal logistical route for delivering supplies across a massive, shifting urban area under tight budget constraints, instead of relying on a human manager's guess, which is low rationality.
Right, their gut feeling.
Or uses sophisticated modeling to program the solution. You input all the factual constraints, distance, traffic patterns, cost, vehicle capacity, and the computer outputs the objectively most efficient route.
So the technology handles the complex calculation, effectively turning a highly non-programmed logistical problem into a programmed objective solution.
Exactly. It extends the organization's rational capacity far, far beyond the limits of the individual administrative brain.
But even with these sophisticated tools, we know organizational rationality remains imperfect. Simon outlined internal barriers that restrict our ability to achieve that efficiency, even when we have the facts.
The first, and probably the most common barrier, is the problem of subgoals. In any large, complex organization, departments specialize. The finance department focuses exclusively on financial health.
HR focuses on staffing metrics, marketing on market share.
And what happens when their focus gets too narrow?
They start optimizing for their own success, their sub-goal.
At the expense of the main organizational mission. The finance department might prioritize cash preservation so heavily that they refuse necessary investment for the R&D department. They're acting with perfect rationality according to their sub-goal of financial prudence.
But generating a wildly irrational outcome for the organization as a whole by stifling innovation. This silo thinking destroys overall efficiency.
It's a huge problem. And the second barrier brings us right back to that fundamental separation. The intrusion of values.
We established that the administrative ideal is to deal only with facts.
But in reality, administrators are human. Their personal prejudices, their ingrained cultural norms, their ethical compass, or even their strong attachment to a particular leadership style. These values inevitably seep into the factual assessment of the means.
So if an administrator believes, based on a personal value, that method X is immoral,
they might deliberately ignore factual data showing that method X is the cheapest and fastest means to the goal. Values provide these irrational boundaries that supersede the efficiency criteria.
So the organization has to constantly fight against both structural silos and human bias just to remain rational.
It's an ongoing battle, and part of that battle involves managing the human element through motivation, which, as we said, ties back directly to Barnard's earlier insights.
Okay, let's look at that motivational side, starting with the contribution satisfaction equilibrium.
This really defines the transactional nature of the employment contract. The employee provides a contribution, their time, their skill, their effort.
And they expect satisfaction in return: salary, benefits, status, opportunities.
The equilibrium is met as long as the satisfaction they receive equals, or preferably slightly exceeds, the contribution they're making. If that balance tilts negatively, if the employee feels they are giving more than they are receiving, the motivation just evaporates.
And the decision point for that employee to leave the organization is what Simon called the 0 point.
The 0 point is the threshold of opportunity cost. An employee's decision to stay is rational only if the total satisfaction provided by their current job is demonstrably better than the next best alternative job available to them.
So if the pay drops or the status declines and the satisfaction dips below that 0 point,
they are rationally compelled to exit, to find a better equilibrium elsewhere.
And finally, the most important psychological tool for maintaining daily order: the zone of acceptance. This sounds like the secret sauce for management control.
It really is the psychological cornerstone of hierarchy. The zone of acceptance is this crucial psychological state where a subordinate accepts an order without consciously questioning its legitimacy or practicality. They just comply routinely.
And this zone is established by the employment contract, the organizational culture, and established trust.
Right, so an order that falls inside the zone is one the subordinate knows is expected of them. A concrete example of an order inside the zone would be:
mop the floor, process this spreadsheet, attend a required meeting at 9 a.m.
Exactly. These orders are seen as legitimate, reasonable expectations inherent in the job description. The employee complies automatically.
And what happens when an order falls outside the zone?
The subordinate stops, and they question it. They might even disobey. An order that falls outside the zone might be something like, use your personal credit card to pay for the company's mandatory holiday party.
Or falsify this piece of financial data.
Yes. These orders impose personal costs, they violate ethics, or they fall wildly outside the terms of employment. The administrator, who relies on constant obedience, must ensure their commands consistently remain within that psychological boundary for every employee.
So the administrative man, constrained by his bounded rationality and constantly balancing his contribution against his satisfaction, needs one single, verifiable standard to guide his choices between different means. And Simon gave him one: efficiency.
Efficiency serves as the objective criterion. Since the administrator is forbidden from dealing with subjective values, their task is reduced to finding the optimal means to a predefined end.
And how did Simon define efficiency?
For him, it's simple: taking the shortest path and using the cheapest means possible to achieve the set goal. It's measurable time and money. It's factual.
And this commitment to objective efficiency, rooted in that separation of fact and value, brings us back to the philosophical foundation we touched on earlier.
Logical positivism. The idea that all meaningful statements are either verifiable, like facts, or analytical, like mathematics, and that subjective normative claims must be excluded, is the hallmark of logical positivism. Simon was determined to rescue administration from the realm of philosophical speculation and place it firmly within the rigorous, testable framework of science, just like physics.
Now, here's where the intellectual drama really begins, because not everyone cheered this scientific rigor. When Simon published this, he immediately provoked a furious backlash from scholars who thought he had, thrown the baby out with the bathwater.
The criticism, led notably by scholars like Norton E. Long and Vincent Ostrom, was profound. They looked at Simon's vigorous separation of facts, which he called administration, and values, which he called politics.
And they argued he had inadvertently committed a historical error.
A huge one. And that error was reviving the old discredited politics-administration dichotomy.
Okay, we need to remember the context here. The politics-administration dichotomy was the defining idea of early public administration in America.
It was the idea that political officials decide the goals, the values, and then neutral, unbiased administrators simply execute them, the facts. That idea had been largely discredited by the mid-century.
Why was it discredited?
Because everyone realized that administrators don't just execute. They interpret, they allocate scarce resources, they influence policy through their daily choices, and they are constantly making value-laden decisions in the field.
So the scholarly consensus was that politics and administration were fused.
Fusion, yes. They are inseparable. And then Simon comes along years later arguing that to be scientific, we must only focus on the factual means and ignore the normative ends.
And the critics argued that this was just the old, discredited dichotomy wrapped up in new, complex psychological terminology.
That was the core of the argument.
Let's use an example. If the political goal, the value, is equitable distribution of water, the efficiency expert focuses on the cheapest pipe and the shortest distance.
Right. Purely factual.
But the political reality is that choosing one pipe route over another is a value choice. It determines which community gets access first and which community doesn't. The means is the value in that case.
That's the heart of the criticism. Ostrom and Long said that by insisting administration should only focus on facts and efficiency, Simon rendered his theory politically naive. It ignores the reality that in public service, especially, the means and the ends are constantly interacting.
You can't simply reduce complex policy implementation to the shortest, cheapest means, because the very definition of the goal, the value, often shifts based on the administrative resources, the facts that are available.
Exactly. So while Simon brilliantly explained how a single person makes a choice, the critics argued he failed to capture the political, value-driven environment in which those choices truly occur.
It exposed the ultimate limitation of a strict, logical, positivist approach in governance.
It did. Administration is fundamentally a normative enterprise. It's driven by ideas of what should be done, not just the verifiable reality of what is the cheapest path. His theory was psychologically brilliant, but politically insufficient for the complexities of democracy.
We have covered massive ground today, traveling from the internal contradictions of classical management principles, which Simon so rightly called proverbs.
And we saw exactly why they were just proverbs.
To his construction of a true science, based on the separation of the factual means from the subjective value.
We internalize the reality of bounded rationality, recognizing that we are all satisficers, seeking that good enough solution rather than the perfect, exhausting one.
Right. And we explored how organizations use concepts like the zone of acceptance to ensure routine compliance, and how Simon's theory, despite all its rigor, drew fire for potentially reviving that discredited politics-administration dichotomy.
That fusion critique is so important.
It is. And it brings us to our final thought. Simon's ultimate strategic advice to the manager was to use technology operations research, computer modeling, to convert novel, non-programmed decisions into routine, predictable, programmed ones. This is the essence of efficiency and control.
But if the organization's most rational and reliable systems are those designed to handle the routine, and if we live in a world defined by constant accelerated global change, climate instability, technological disruption, entirely new forms of conflict, what does that imply for governance?
If the purpose of a highly rational administrative system is to make the novel simple, then any challenge that defies this programming immediately falls into the lowest tier of organizational rationality.
Exactly. Does Simon's analysis suggest that the most important, truly novel, and existential challenges facing modern organizations, from multinational corporations to global governance bodies, are, by the very mechanism of administrative design, the ones they are inherently least equipped to handle rationally?
So, are we systematically biased towards solving yesterday's predictable problems while stumbling through tomorrow's unprecedented chaos?
That's something to ponder as you look at how decisions are made around you every day.